So, dear colleagues, good afternoon. Please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Ivica Kovacevic. I am full professor in labor law at the University of Belgrade, Faculty of Law. Of course, my vote of thanks to organizers for the trust and opportunity to serve as the chair to this parallel session. Our session is dedicated to the issue of regulating artificial intelligence. Of course, that is a very important issue if we have in mind the fact that the use of artificial intelligence systems in the world of work actually affects on recruiting, hiring, exercising all rights, obligations, duties related to work. And somehow in many states, these issues are some kind of gray area. So they're not regulated at all or not in a appropriate way. On the opposite side, when it comes to EU in 2024, of course, there were very important instruments adopted or agreed upon, especially when it comes to AI Act and when it comes to also directive. We are all, of course, expecting the official journal of the EU to be published and to read directive in that way. So our task is to reconsider the importance of the issue of regulating artificial intelligence. We will do that on example of algorithmic management, which will be dealt with our dear colleague Darko Božičić. Then on the example of platform work, but firstly, when it comes to cloud work, it has the platform work which is entirely performed online, which will be dealt by Jelena Stavčević, and our colleague Margarita Koševa will talk about platform work, but location-based platform work, namely food delivery riders, and this issue will also be dealt by our dear colleague Delia, who is present online. So that's the plan for this session. As it is agreed upon by organizers or with organizers, each speaker will have 10 to 12 minutes for presentations, and after that we will have sufficient time for discussion, for reflections, for questions. So thank you all for being with us, and really warm welcome to all of you, and please participate because there are a lot of things that have to be discussed. So that's our plan for today, and if you agree, without further ado, let's start with our first speaker. So just to say a few words about our first speaker, that is our colleague Darko Božičić. He is a lecturer or PhD assistant at the University of Novi Sad, Faculty of Law. At this university, colleague Darko actually defended his PhD dissertation, which was dedicated to the issue of exercise and protection of right to work in digital economy. And I have to say that colleague Božičić is, when it comes to Serbia, the most competent legal scholar in matters of automation, digitalization of work. So, dear colleague Darko, please, the floor is yours. The issue that Darko is going to talk about is legal complementarity as a conditio sine qua non of algorithmic management regulation. So, although we are connecting algorithmic management with platform work, Darko will also talk about traditional forms of work because they're also influenced by algorithmic management. So, Darko, please, the floor is yours. You can start, and I will try to share the presentation, please.
Okay. So, firstly, thank you very much for introduction. I mean, it's like a heavy weight to carry on after your words, but I'll try to give my best on that. So I think there is no doubt that information technology has changed the way how we live and, of course, the way how we work. And the whole story of digitalization and automatization of work was accompanied by the thesis that progress in the IT sphere will make the people lose their jobs because of the automation. But more optimistic views saw the advantages on that issue in point that there will be more free time for us to do what we ever want to do and not just to perform the work. But this research is on a whole other spectrum of employment relationship. It's not on how information technologies change the way people work. It's how the information technologies change the way of how employer is doing his prerogatives, managerial prerogatives, actually. So, it's all about algorithmic management. So these are just a few keywords on algorithm and management, two words which is persist that term. But to make long story short, algorithmic management represents the use of software to automate organizational functions traditionally carried out by human managers. And these are some presentation around management. These are some tasks characteristic for management operation, and there is a definition of algorithm. But the interesting question is how, or actually even better, where did algorithm management came from? And the answer is platform economy. So basically, the business model of all digital platforms is completely based on algorithmic management. When the selection of workers who will perform work, the instructions on how to perform the work, monitoring, assessment, everything is carried out by the algorithmic management. And in order to know how to regulate it, I think we should first have to understand how these softwares actually works. And basically, data is the input, which are assessed by the algorithm management, and then we have like decision on some employment or labor rights for the person who carry out the work. But all these algorithms are based on machine learning algorithms, and machine learning is an application of artificial intelligence, where an algorithm is exposed to training data from which it learns how to identify some attributes, which then serve as a guide to desired outcome. And training data is material used to teach algorithm what to look for. And then in that black box, machine learning algorithms basically identify the correlations between characteristics and outcomes and use those correlations to predict outcomes for future cases. But again, to make long story short, with machine learning, software learn the solution by finding pattern in data. But where is actually the problem? The problem is that we don't know what inputs are. We don't know what inputs are. We don't know what correlations algorithm is looking for. So only what the person knows is decision on their right. And tricky thing is that one of the main characteristics of algorithmic management is the absence of transparency regarding the way of how it functions. And for that reason, algorithmic management is often referred to as a black box in literature. But however, several studies in the last few years have revealed interesting details regarding the correlation between the data which algorithm management collects and the decision it makes. So the main parameters for selection of workers who will perform specific task is the period of how long the worker is on concrete platform, or how tasks did he or she perform, or have he or she cancelled any of firstly accepted tasks. So basically, these all data are unrelated to work itself. They are not important for the work or for the worker. They are only important for the digital platform, and that's why platform use that data in the algorithm. And on top of all of that, the worker knows just the decision. Worker, there is no explanation, there is no introduction on how to maybe sue the decision. So basically, all of that stays in traditional employment relationship, but here it isn't, and it's become clear that we need to regulate the algorithmic management, and the first regulation on international level is proposal for directive on improving working conditions in platform work. I just put on slide just few articles which target this very issue. So these are all articles are in chapter 3, and they should lead to more transparency and decision explanation of how the algorithmic decisions are made. But the problem is that platform work directive applies only to platform workers, and algorithmic management has more wider usage than just in digital economy and goes far beyond of the platform economy itself. And this, I think, this makes the problem significantly more complicated from a legal point of view, because I think right now we are in some sort of paradoxical situation, because just until yesterday we talked about how it is important to have regulation on platform work, and now certain aspects that are essential for protection of human rights, human rights at work, will be regulated in platform work, but not in traditional forms of work. And even there, in traditional forms of work, the algorithmic management leaves almost similar consequences as in platform work. And there's a great study here on the implications of algorithmic management in traditional forms of work. So you can find it, and it's really useful for me. It really shows how in traditional services, traditional economy, also algorithmic management is used, and not in a way good for workers, only in a way which is important to companies. So, what we can do in the existing legal environment was a question which I asked myself here, because, as I said, the platform directive is very narrow in the field of application. So, first instrument which is convenient to regulate just part of the algorithmic management is GDPR. There are also some there are also some articles which I think that are important and can be useful in regulating algorithmic management, but GDPR is not the only document. One more is AI Act. I mean, how algorithmic management is based on artificial intelligence. This is also an important instrument on regulation of algorithmic management. This regulation is based on risk-based approach, which means that AI systems are classified in relation to what threat they represent on some union core values. And risk levels are actually the classification. There are AI systems with unacceptable risks for union values, AI systems with high, limited, and minimal or no risks on core values of European Union. And as it's specified in Annex 3 of the AI Act, AI systems adopt in the context of employment, workers management, and access to self-employment are classified as high-risk systems. But in terms of efficiency, this regulation has its limitations. And for me, core limitation and crucial one lies in the fact that classification depends on the provider's intent purpose, which may differ from the use which such systems are put. So basically, employer or platform who use the algorithmic management can say, oh, I use that in a way of having more efficiency in the work, but on the other hand, the result is monitoring of that work. So basically, I think it will be the biggest problem in application is act in the employment law and especially on algorithmic management. So basically, this is the teaser, and any questions if you have, I'm more open to discuss it. Thank you very much, and I hope I did a good job.
Of course, time
timing.
is perfect. So thank you very much, dear colleague Darko. What do you think? Would you prepare to have discussion after each presentation, or at the end? What would be the most suitable approach when it comes to you, dear participants?
I think we can do it at the end, so we can
Maybe at the end, just to have a wider. Okay, Jelena, I will also ask you to help me with your presentation. I do apologize for delegating this task to you. I do apologize, but somehow maybe to be on the safe side. I do apologize for that. And dear colleagues, now we will have a nice opportunity to listen to the presentation of our dear colleague Jelena Starčević. She is a PhD candidate at the School of Labor Studies at McMaster University, Canada. Her PhD dissertation explores the relationship between platform business models, work conditions, and regulation frameworks in the context of multi-party relationships, and she is really an important scholar when it comes to that intersection of technology, law, and work. So, dear Jelena, the floor is yours. Your paper is entitled "Navigating Regulatory Space: Unraveling the Dynamics of Online Platform Work Regulation in Serbia." So, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Kovačević, and all the participants online and in person. I don't know why my presentation doesn't look as nice as it did on my laptop, but I apologize. Well, and I also think Darko gave me a nice kind of opening for my presentation, because he mentioned several EU legal acts like the GDPR, the AI Act, the Platform Work Directive. And that was kind of the idea behind doing this paper, is that we are having some, like a proliferation all of a sudden of different legal acts that are pertaining in different legal subcategories or regulatory domains, and that sometimes these regulatory domains can clash or be in a competition. So this is what I want to talk about today, first starting with a broader view of platform work and regulating AI, then a little bit of a comparison between what's happening at the EU level and in Serbia, and then zooming in on a specific regulatory process that happened in Serbia with regulating online platform work. So we know that regulating platform work was just one of many legal issues that came with the advancement of digital technologies and artificial intelligence. And if we look at debates proceeding to this time, we can see almost two camps. One is saying, oh, digital technologies should be left alone and unregulated, like the deregulation theory, because if we regulate them, we're only going to stifle innovation. And on the other hand, we also have proponents of regulation. They're saying, well, these new technologies are creating gaps in the existing legal frameworks that are harming people and leaving them unprotected, and therefore we need to regulate these new technologies. And especially after pandemic, I think this notion of return of the state was exemplified. And I think what we have been hearing yesterday and today here too is that there is a growing recognition that AI has to be regulated in order to have responsible development and deployment of technologies, but also we need to understand better how these new technologies are impacting our economy and the way work and economy is organized, whether we're going to call this economy informational capitalism, surveillance capitalism, or platform capitalism. So in order to connect this to previous theories, while thinking about how norms and institutions that pertain to particular regulated domain is not too theoretically discussed, there are some examples of authors that are looking at how different system norms and practices of different regulatory domains influence discourses and help us understand how and why certain regulations appear to happen in the society. So Professor Fudge uses regulatory domains, Professor Keller uses discursive formation, and the one that I'm kind of using in this paper is from Hatcher and Warren, which is regulatory space. And all these concepts are used to say how social activities or processes are being translated into legal language and embedded in certain regulatory domains. And by analyzing this process, we can see how we understand social activities. And then that also has implication of our ideological stance towards these activities, but also material consequences for the participants. And as I mentioned, I use regulatory space as an analytic tool to map actors in the regulatory space on online platform regulation in Serbia to see what were the regulatory goals, the discourses, the resources, and how these regulatory actors interacted among each other to get to the solution that was adopted. So if we want to compare what's happening at the level of EU and what's happening in Serbia, it's really a very contrasting case study because European Union has really proactive in regulating AI in general, and it's part of their also political agenda to be a rule-setting institution globally. And if we look at various regulation that has been adopted since the 1995 onward, we can identify variety of legal discourses that have been used to regulate certain aspects of AI. At the beginning, it was mostly based on consumer protection, and then following the consumer protection, we emphasized transparency and access to remedies. And then, as you mentioned, with GDPR, there was more emphasis on human rights and how to get more non-discrimination and equity in use of algorithms. And most recently, with the Digital Market Act, we see this grounded in competition law, how to prevent gatekeepers and things like that. And some authors, labor lawyers, have looked at this variety of legal acts and even called for a new domain being created, is digital law. And what we also heard today is that one of the characteristics of this perhaps new legal subcategory is this effort to strike a balance between innovation and protection, right? And then we have to assess how that balance is struck. And if we talk about regulating AI and work, most prominent site of regulatory debate, but also the instrument was the Platform Work Directive. And going back to this notion of my interest of regulatory process, so if you look at the EU, like the representative from the Directorate of Employment this morning mentioned 23 million, but only 5.5 million of people that are in risk of being misclassified. And the discrepancy between those numbers is because most people do work online or completely remotely. But the EU Commission and the institution decided to provide an integrated solution to platform work, so not to fragment it into on location and online, but to regulate it as a whole. And if we look back at 2019, we also see over time that there has been change in regulatory goals. So back in 2019, when they started talking about the platform directive, the main regulatory goal was to provide social protection for self-employed and maybe see how some collective rights can be given to self-employed. And now, 4 years later, and 2 years of grueling negotiation, we have employment relationship and algorithmic management. So various factors influence this change in regulatory goals. If we look at Serbia, what we have as an only attempt so far to regulate platform work was the attempt to regulate online platform work. So from the start, we have a fragmented approach. And the negotiation started with the idea of regulating labor rights and the status, and we ended up with having a new tax regime. So, and really in that, from labor rights to tax regime is where my interest lies to understand how this happens. And just to situate, I mean, I think everybody here is aware about how much online platform work is present in Serbia, that we are one of the leaders. According to Public Policy Research Center, there is at least 7,000 individuals dedicating over 10 hours per week to this kind of work, that it wasn't regulated. People could perform this formally, either as entrepreneurs or limited liable companies, or informally. But the crucial moment that triggered the regulatory process was really when the government in December 2020 initiated the collection of outstanding taxes, which then triggered response from a fair amount of freelancers that organized public strikes and made these public pressures to the government to do something about it. And the response was forming of a working group that was supposed to deal with the status and rights of these workers. So if we map who participated in this process, it was a very broad process where a lot of actors participated. So we had Ministry of Labor as the main and the main responsibility for this working group, but there was also a presence from the Prime Minister Cabinet, Minister of Finance and Tax Administration, NGOs like NALED and Public Policy Research Center, social partners, and a host of workers' representatives that are Association of Freelancers. And each of these actors came into negotiation with their own views about what's the problem and the status of freelancers. So some of the discourses that were promoted during the work group was, on one hand, freedom of entrepreneurship. So we should, in line with this deregulation kind of camp, we should leave them alone and not regulate them. Or others were promoting that this was a tax evasion or undeclared work that is undermining fair competition. And there was some actors promoted the idea of labor rights and social protection as a way of decommodifying these workers. But in the end, the main problem was legal classification. So how do we classify these workers and how do we see what is the work they do? Is this a service? Is this work relationship? Who is their employer? So this is where kind of the negotiation broke down and we ended up with having just a tax regulation. And from my interviews with main stakeholders, there are few things that come up as very specific that point to the lack of government's capacity to regulate that frustrates these already complex questions. So a lot of stakeholders mentioned basic lack of information about the Platform Act. So there is a lack of information that the representatives of government were asking for analysis, for explanation, but there is also a lot of mistrust because workers' association didn't want to share information. So that was also a specific dynamic. Another point that was brought up was lack of authority in the state, in the government, because the participants were acutely aware that Serbian government cannot impose obligations of a foreign employer. And also there is a lack of organizational resources, something that quote unquote happened a lot during the interviews were describing parties as uninterested or uninformed or lacking knowledge about how to provide solutions for this. And of course, more general, there was a lack of political will, like nobody wants to touch the labor law. That's something I heard over and over again. But again, there was kind of attitudinal ambivalence among workers' associations themselves that they didn't advocate getting labor rights forefront because the idea of getting less burdens was more important than getting rights. So in those dynamics, there was nobody powerful enough to advocate for regulating this platform work in the domain of labor law. And this is why we ended up with tax regime. And I'm sure I'm over time, so I'm just going to conclude with food for thought that we can discuss during the discussion. So we have the adopted EU platform directive, we have adopted tax regime from online platform workers. So maybe now there is another opportunity to revisit the issue of labor rights of these categories of platform workers. But again, even the EU directive doesn't provide prescriptive solutions, so it requires some innovation and some regulatory capacity from the national government. So that risk that we've seen in terms of capacity still remains. So this is something we can maybe discuss how to proceed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We need you over here. So, thank you very much, of course. And now we will have a third presenter. This is our dear colleague Margarita Kosheva. She is a PhD student at the Institute of Philosophy and Sociology at Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. She has a bachelor degree in sociology, law, economics, and innovation. Also holds a master degree in philosophy, and in her research, Margarita investigates the digital transformation of labor in food delivery platforms. That's why her presentation, dear colleague, of course, is dedicated to the very important issue, the issue of employment status of food delivery riders in Bulgaria and the possible effects of the EU directive on that. So, dear Margarita, the floor is yours. Please, just a second. To have your presentation posted, and we can start after that. Okay, that's it. Please, dear Margarita. It's okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much for introducing me. My presentation is about tax riders. I will start with a short introduction about platform work. Platform work, as we mentioned, is a form of employment in which organizations or individuals use an online platform to assess other organizations or individuals, to solve specific issues or provide specific services in exchange for payment, of course. As we mentioned, there are two types of platform work, on location based and online. The first one, of course, the delivery riders, and the second one, for example, data entry. Globally, the number of platform digital labor platforms has increased fivefold in the last decade. A platform worker is an individual who performs work or provides services through an online platform, often connecting with clients or customers through these mobile applications. Delivery platforms. These platforms connect consumers with a wide range of restaurants, not only restaurants, of course, shops, pharmacies, and allow them to order food with just a few taps on their mobile devices. Also, these platforms take commissions from these restaurants, and according to some articles, this commission is between 12 and 35%, depending on the country and on the platform. And according to the International Labour Organization, the number of platforms in the delivery sector is the highest, 383. This information is in 2021. About the problem in Bulgaria, of course. In 2019, almost 5% of Bulgarians have tried working through digital labor platforms. These people are aged 18-64, and over 1% of them are gaining their main income through these platforms. Also, at the same time, 2019, about 43,000 freelancers use the main platforms. And the decreasing number highlights the need to focus on social rights and social protection of platform workers. There are many authors that claim that riders have precarious working conditions. We will see them. Issues faced by riders. The first one, low wages. The second one, health risk, because many of them deliver food through their bicycles, scooters, private cars, and if they earn more money if they make more deliveries per day. So they're at a daily risk because many of them even don't have insurance. On third place.
And they drive like crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Really bad. Third, long working hours. In fourth position, lack of protection. Actually, in Bulgaria and in other European countries, platform workers, especially riders, are not presented by trade unions. They do not trust them. They're not. They don't know. They're not informed about the activity of the trade unions, and they just don't need to be protected by trade unions. So this is the fourth position, and the fifth position is classification. About the directive, we have heard about the directive. As a result of these precarious working conditions and incorrect employment status, in 2021, the European Commission proposed a directive to improve the working conditions of platform workers. The directive introduces two important improvements. The first one is the presumption of employment rather than self-employment. And the other one is that riders cannot be dismissed or fired by a decision made by an algorithm. So the directive introduces more rules on how to protect personal data, and the directive prohibits processing personal data related to religion, to psychological or psychological state. Yeah. Also, there are there must be at least 2 out of 5 polling indicators. I will read them. First one, upper limit on the amount of money workers can receive, supervision of their performance, control over the distribution or allocation of tasks, control over working conditions and restrictions on choosing working hours, restrictions on their freedom to organize their working rules, on their appearance or conduct. Also, this year, on April, last month, the European Parliament adopted the Platform Work Directive with 554 votes in favor. Theoretical framework. The directive will definitely bring riders many advantages, such as many authors claim that, such as presumption of employment, algorithmic management, social rights, social protection, conducting legitimate trade union activities, but according to these authors, there is no minimum wage standard. Also, Oliver Phillips, according to him, the directive will not lead to uniform changes in the legislation of the member state, but is the first step in the right direction. This author believes that trade unions needs to be more active and to propose another directive covering algorithmic workplace management, not just platform workers, but all workers. During my research, my objectives were to gather information about employment status of delivery riders in Bulgaria, and the second one to collect data on the possible effects of the directive on riders. Methodology. I use qualitative methods. In the year 2020 and 2021, I made 6 in-depth interviews with takeaway riders, and this year, in the spring, I made 4 more in-depth interviews with global riders and takeaway riders. Most of them are men with high school education, and they work as riders as a second job. About the results, first, takeaway riders are, we can say, correctly classified as employees with a contract that guarantees them medical coverage, social security, pension, paid holidays, minimum wage also, accident, unemployment, and parental insurance. However, global riders have also contract, but different kinds of contracts for a certain period of time. For example, 3 months, 4 months, summer contract. Riders are not protected by the law, as in the case of accident, unemployment, and parental insurance. This type of contract is not covered by health and safety regulations, and there is no minimum wage. Only they gain their income only according to the deliveries. Also, all respondents hadn't heard of the platform work directive before. It was the first time they knew about this directive. Some of them are cautious and wary, while think that the directive will lead to beneficial changes, but not in the near future. I think that, yeah, the next one is conclusion. So we can say that according to these in-depth interviews, takeaway riders have a good quality of work rather than global riders. Global riders do not benefit from social rights and protections and need to change their contracts. Also, as mentioned, according to these precarious working conditions riders have, I think these relations the directive could have a good impact, positive effect on these relations and contribute to a high level of safety at work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, dear colleague Margarita. Now we will have a chance to listen our dear colleague Delia Badois. I do apologize if I didn't pronounce well family name. Our colleague Delia is a research fellow at the Center for Advanced Internet Studies in Bochum, Germany. She's also a senior researcher at the Research Institute for Quality of Life in Romania. She specializes in global labor studies with a focus on gendered employment, the politics of new technology at work, the platform economy, and precarious working conditions. I would also like to mention that our colleague has been involved in many research projects, scientific projects, among much else, with Competence Center of the Future of Work and Center for European Policy Studies, both are situated in Brussels. Also, Research Institute for Work and Society, Leuven, and Leibniz Institute for Social Sciences in Cologne. So quite impressive biography. And the colleague Delia, please, your presentation is entitled Digital Micro-Entrepreneurs and Food Delivery Labor Platforms in Romania and Germany. Do migration background and algorithmic control really matter for public policy? So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for this great introduction and a very generous one. So thank you again for the opportunity to give this short talk. My presentation is part of an ongoing research project that tried to link flexible work, digital algorithms, and work-related inequality in the platform economy by focusing on a study case on food delivery platform workers in Romania and Germany. So the scope of my paper presentation today is to give you some maybe theoretical and empirical insights on the narrative of various challenges and opportunities faced by workers from the food delivery platform industry, particularly those who are socially excluded as migrant and those who had a low income, and putting this in the context of regulating platform labor in Europe. I will start by saying just a short maybe introduction related to our topic today. So in the past decade, the labor market policy in Europe, especially the policy on digitalization, we know that leads to new opportunities for workers, but also to the creation of new type of vulnerabilities and risks associated with the platform work regulation in Europe. So if you look closely to the European policy discourse, the accelerated development of platforms, specifically in the pandemic years, 2020 and 2021, along with their cross-border specificity, represented a big challenge for the European states to find strategies for fair access to social protection and regulation for the business management used by labor platforms. So now, in the light of the EU directive on improving working conditions in platform labor, along with the new AI Act, the policy core issues and policy measures related to online platforms and more generally on platform work highlighted gray areas that, in my view, require further attention from policymakers. Now, with the new EU directive adopted in March this year, platform workers at least from the EU countries had the chance to secure their better working condition, to see a future for the labor protection through clear guidelines that may secure their unfair practices of using AI on a large scale. So in the hopeful scenario of regulating platform work across Europe, it's clear that ensuring maybe inclusive access to the labor market specifically for migrant workers, but also for the vulnerable one, remain a challenge, and this is to be discussed to my presentation today, but also related to your presentation as well. The proposed regulatory changes that made this directive, they may carry significant weight in governing the algorithmic decision-making process for the process of labor platforms themselves. These platforms operate as businesses increasing reliant on algorithm decision-making making, but also on information technology, personal data to drive their profitability. So, however, I argue that additional measures are needed to address transparency gaps, ensure non-discriminatory in practices in algorithmic management uses. So in my view, it seems unlikely that the AI Act used by different companies may be designed as high risk, for example, if we are trying to talk more about regulation platform work connected to algorithms. So the proposed Platform Workers Directive may include stipulation on regulating algorithm management, but in the same time, it's not very sure to me that this will be like extended to cover most workers, even on standard employment contracts. So we can already observe here the dominance of a larger labor platform, specifically in the food delivery, but also in other sectors in Europe, that are creating new forms of work that often exploit vulnerable people. So when we try to analyze the EU directive, we have to see how platform labor is functioning. And here we know that at least three parties are involved, and you already, I think, mentioned that. So we have the platform, we have the worker, and the clients. So by looking more to my scheme, I find it particularly difficult to discuss regulating AI used by platform, because we still don't know many things about how actually AI is functioning on platform working condition. Moreover, little is known even about big international companies themselves, specifically in Eastern and South part of Europe. So in my project, I discovered that the ecosystem of food delivery platforms is very dynamic, as many platforms company emerged as startups, like really small companies, but they expanded. They usually get taken over by other biggest company, or they change their physical location by moving their headquarters to another country. So far, for example, I look at the Spanish Global Platform to see how they are organized in terms of regulation and transparency of their terms and conditions. So I discovered, for example, they operate across border without formal registration and specific tax obligation. And this is the case, for example, in Romania. By looking at this dynamic, Glovo was acquired by Delivery Hero in 2020. And at the same time, Delivery Hero, which was founded in Germany, was recently acquired by the Dutch company Just Eat, the Lieferando company, which is the biggest food delivery company in Germany. So I might say that the platform sector is very dynamic, and somehow that's make like more space for us to discuss and to criticize, even in the context of the regulating of AI. So in this scheme, a key component is that we are trying to compress here is the platform governance, but also the algorithmic decision making process used by platforms. They operate in the same time as digital platform or online platform, as we are already expressed, as a business company, sometimes like a very big company, but also as a labor organization, not employers, but as a labor organization, like people like working for them, or there are somehow people involved in the functioning of the platform. The problem is that they have like frequent changes in control and measurement to the reproduction of algorithm, and technique. In the same time, the workers, the most vulnerable one, are not informed about those changes. So in my research, I try to look specifically at the working condition of this platform, but in the same time, I look as a multi-dimensional concept that overlaps with the employment related factors that foster different beneficial outcome for the workers. In regulating AI in platform labor, I look more at this intersection between migrant backgrounds and algorithmic management, which is particularly pronounced in the context of food delivery couriers. Many migrant workers play a crucial role in sustaining food delivery. With or without our current regulation in Europe, the platform economy remain highly dependent on the cheap labor from both EU and non-EU migrants. We have to acknowledge that. They are dependent on minorities and also dependent on very low skilled workers. Migrants are attracted to the EU countries for their somehow better regulation and quality of life, but they often face like language barriers when they need to claim their rights, which restricts their ability to organize themselves or take action, for example, against platforms. Migrant workers, and I'm putting it in the very center of our discussion today, is that they benefit from the flexibility of platforms, but in the same, and also low administrative requirement, but in the same time, they are somehow trapped in platform labor. They are looking for a temporary solution, but in the most of the time, and my research also showed that in many cases it become a long-term solution for them. So my research looked at how they are working full time, and I think Margarita also explained a bit the situation in Bulgaria, which is very closely to the situation in Germany and Romania as well. They tend to like to work more for earning more in the same time, but there are also some discriminatory practices in the middle, because usually the native colleagues tend to earn more than the migrant workers, even in a platform labor. And we can discuss this later. So I think the dominance of delivery platforms has a profound impact on workers' life, from frequent shifts in control and performance of their work. And the reality is that for the majority of them, their quality of life and their well-being is being affected by the algorithmic management functioning. I will move forward. I will skip the objective and the methodology that I've been collecting. We can discuss this during our discussion. If we, for example, look at the employment status of platform workers, that maybe can have an impact on the regulating or regulation of algorithmic management in Europe. You can see that in both countries, Romania and Germany, even they're of course very different, but digital labor platforms operate under uncertain and unclear legislation that is subject to minimum standards established at national level. National regulations still need revision to address specific needs for social protection and secure working conditions. One specific challenge for policy research, in my view, is the uncertain employment status, which, in my opinion, is the main risk of the lack of social protection in some cases, and also a status that can involve precarity or insecurity, or the lack of continuity for the most of the workers. So basically, the category of platform workers are situated somehow at the border between self-employment status and employment and temporary employment status with contracts. In the same time, if we look at the case of Romania, for example, the employment status of platform workers fall under the traditional labor code legislation. On the other hand, they remain trapped in the specificity of standard employment contracts that really create some inequality when we compare them with the people that are self-employed or freelance, as we said before. So for most of them, for example, for the freelance, there is no possibility for them to be protected by collective agreements or social dialogue legislation. On the other hand, we know that the legal binding of platform work, and here we have guidelines from the EU directive, which is a good thing, but somehow we can discuss the risks of insecure wages, especially in association with the algorithmic management control of work, which is still a way forward to discuss and to criticize this. So with the directive, there is a unique possibility for them right now and there is this expectation for couriers to unite, to be represented, and to negotiate their professional status or bonuses or earnings. On the other part, we have the case of Germany. Migrant workers in Germany remain essential for the operation of platforms. So the legal binding is lacking, but the majority of workers in Germany are employed with contracts. So they are somehow secured. But I argue that the existence of the employment contract does not necessarily mean that workers have a clear idea or who their employer is, or where are their responsibilities, or how they are made understood, how algorithms are involved in their work. So the situation of migrants is a bit different comparing to other countries, because they face challenges navigating the country's very bureaucratic procedures, very difficult regulation. It's a very regulated country. And the majority of workers in at least the one that I've been investigating face this lack of familiarity with the regulation in this country. So inclusive platform governance alone, and even in the context of regulating AI, cannot somehow address all the legal and social impediment faced by migrants in Germany. Here, I may say that local authorities must take many steps to safeguard unregistered workers. I will move to the end of the presentation. So in my research, I try to combine different methods using an integrated methodology based on both qualitative approach, interviews, but also social media analysis. And I use the typology of Hirschman to analyze their discourses and narrative concerning their working condition, and more specifically how they relate to algorithms that are involved in their measurement of their work. I discovered that, for example, social media operates as a collective voice for platform workers. So they are like somehow finding their voice to discussing their problems and trying to understand more about how the app is actually working, for example, by cooperating and finding support on different social media groups, as for example, Facebook groups or WhatsApp groups. In my view, self-organized action on social media platforms offer for many migrant workers a unique tool that allow them to communicate in their native language, but in the same time using this automatic translation tool available on social media to discuss their problems. If you are just going a bit further, and the intersection between migration and algorithmic management regulation is particularly pronounced in the context of food delivery. So for the majority of the workers, they're often low skilled, and they're lacking exactly the proficiency and the type of skill that makes them understand better what's happening in the algorithmic decision making, or more say behind this process. In their cases, the algorithmic design may aggravate their exploitation, or they can just be subject to unfair treatment, or they can engender security. The pressure of extended delivery, tight schedules, or the pursuit of the extra income and bonuses that they can lead for the majority of them to stress, to unpredictability of their income, or they can be subject to discriminatory practices. I'm talking about digital solidarity because sometimes it's the only way, it's the only tool that they can have, like really immediately, for them to express their problems. So in this case, I may say that even if they're like operating independently, while, for example, waiting for food orders or delivering them to customers, for them, in the majority of cases, it's like a lone job. It's not something like you are doing in team or in a group. That's why I'm somehow trying to express this digital solidarity as a tool that can be somehow put in discussion for concerning the algorithmic management. I will stop here because we had also these technical issues, and I want to have more time for all of us to discuss at the end. And I can just maybe continue if I will have some questions, or I don't know. We can discuss this. If you are agree with me, it's better like this.
Okay, dear Delia, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. Once again, I do apologize for those problems that we had, but luckily they're resolved, so everything is okay. And since we had all our presentations, now it's time for discussion. We have sufficient time for that, for your reflections, questions, comments, suggestions regarding methodology or something else when it comes to our dear colleagues that are actually in some kind of research groups and so on. So let's start. I don't want to abuse my position as a chair to start with my questions. Of course, I have a few of them, but maybe to hear our participants here and also that are present online. Thank you very much for the attention, and now it's time for questions. So is there any question, comment, reflection? Yes, Margarita, please. Yes.
It was very interesting presentation, and I want to add that digital labor platforms are a good opportunity for migrants, of course, but also for people with disabilities. And many people that have disabilities need to have contracts and to receive medical coverage, also pension, etc. So it is very important that the directive to be helpful for them to, yeah, they are not in the field of deliveries, but maybe in the online web-based platforms. So it's important to know.
Of course, it depends on the type of disability. So
yeah,
we can
yeah.
imagine different types of disability, but yes.
They are not regulated, and that's the point. So the directive should go in this direction.
Having in mind the need for special protection, for example, persons with disabilities, and also, of course, we can talk about intersectional approach, not just migrants, but migrants with disabilities and so on. So that could be. Thank you very much for this insight. Are there some other questions or comments? Of course, we had a very long period of presentations now just to remember everything, but yes.
If you have enough time, yeah, my comment, I want to refer back to Darko's presentation first. I'm still puzzled by how transparency will be resolved in the black box. I mean, I have seen this suggestion, sort of, there will be some human involvement in it, but still, I must admit, I'm not convinced because, you know, it sort of comes naturally that if it's an algorithm that makes the decisions, then it's really hard to make those decisions more transparent if it's a machine decision. And my comment to Yellen as well was that, yeah, this taxation before labor rights approach was sort of expected. You know, on one hand, it's always easier to put up a text and resolve the labor rights, as you said. But there was also not the entire overlap between the two groups, the platform workers and what's it called, the freelancers, because we had freelancers who were not platform workers, but were involved in the whole business and vice versa. And I think the most difficult part there was that it was such a divergent group of freelancers that it almost made it impossible for them to reach a consensus on how to regulate, even how to regulate the taxation, and let alone the labor rights. So it still remains a major challenge, but I'm not, even though we're going to be working with the new labor laws, you know, I'm not too optimistic on how, to what extent we can really provide them with proper status. Of course, we'll have our ILO convention coming next year, so that might marginally help, but as you know, it's going to be probably even more general than the directive, because we have to think of all 190 countries. But here, you know, yeah, we'll probably be exploring in more detail how maybe to subdivide the platform workers in maybe various subgroups in order to, I don't know, maybe respond to their needs more precisely. But looking at them as a whole, I'm not so sure we can come up with one unified solution. Just a
okay.
Yeah, I agree with you, Johan. I also don't have hope, you know, to have full transparency for the algorithm. But I think that especially this platform directive will change the way, not in a black box, but in the input section. Yeah, because platform are obliged with this directive to inform workers on what things are monitored and what data will they use for that algorithm. So it's basically right now they do not nothing, you know. But with this, there will be slightly change in just the input phase, but still the algorithmic management will stay a black box.
Yeah, so they can narrow the choice the algorithm makes,
Yeah.
but not dramatically.
Well, and there is always a question, what parameters, what are the parameters that you have to inform workers about? For example, we have in Spain amendment to the law, worker statute, and there is a, which is of course very good solution. We have some kind of information, not consultation, information consultation, but just information of employees regarding parameters of which decisions are based, algorithmic decisions are based, but what parameters? Because we have millions of them, so that's not quite precise, you know, but it's also one step further.
Yeah, and not just that. I mean, there is problem also on the decision side, like the result of the algorithm management. I mean, you got the decision how to challenge it. I mean,
that was my main question.
Yeah, I mean, okay, yeah, there is a little bit light on the input side, you know, there is completely darkness as algorithmic, and okay, I got some decision and how to challenge it. I mean, so that's also
The real employer you keep challenging,
yes,
but not.
yes, that's the problem also.
Okay, thank you, Yelena. Would you like to
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Well, I didn't go into a lot of details of what was happening, but yes, that's what I meant when I said there was a attitudinal ambivalence among the workers, because everybody had their own interest. And I mean, if we talk about the platform work specifically, I think that's kind of woven in their business model also, that there's, you know, they came out with this idea, we are liberating you from toiling from 9 to 5 in factories in a collective setting. So like we are responding to your individual needs and therefore kind of preventing workers to find their common goals. And this is one of the biggest obstacles for collective organizing, because everybody, the flexibility is individual. So how do they bring about solidarity within that, right? So that was one aspect. And the other one on how to regulate. Yes, but I really like somebody said today, like if it's easy to find a solution how to regulate tax, if we put some effort, we can find solution. I mean, it's not like we cannot find solution to regulate. It doesn't have to be, depends on what your goal is, and that's why I was looking at it. So what do we want to provide for these people, and what do these people want to, right? So do they want to have maternity leaves, access to kindergartens, access to loans that they cannot have because they are not in an employment status? So do these rights have to be linked to employment status? That's also something that I think more and more we have to discuss.
And there's one more thing that might affect all this in terms of the context. And it's not something that belongs to the labor law, but it does determine a lot on their possible decisions in this respect. And that is, for example, whether or not in general in the national taxation system, you have progressivity in taxation of labor. Because many of them, if they belong to this lower cohort of in terms of wages, then this lack of progressivity acts as a huge incentive for informality. And this doesn't apply only, of course, to the platform workers, but I think to them, especially now that we're trying to determine the right level of protection. So I think they would be more inclined to seek better levels of protection if what we take away from them through not only through taxation but also contributions taken away from their wages would not be that high as it is now.
Well, if I may.
Of course, we have sufficient time.
Well, I mean, there are several issues there, and I didn't want to go into tax law, but I mean, even this solution is kind of based on the assumption that they are working, because there are some similarities in how they calculate the normative expense and so on, right? So, I mean, we are creating some tax solution on the assumption that they are working, like if we look at independence test too, like those are criteria for employment relationship, but we are just regulating tax without giving rights. But another thing I wanted to mention is that I don't even think it's the matter of how high, but what do they see as getting back? And especially for us as a country that has gone through transition and everything that we have experienced, there is a lot of institutional asymmetry that people don't trust institutions. And in my field work, when I was talking to workers, their main concern for giving anything to the state is mistrust that they're going to get anything back.
With many other groups as well.
And I think if we want to confront informal work and platform work as a part of informal work, then we have to work on those institutional asymmetries as well.
Yes, yes. Oh, okay. Are there some other questions,
I
reflections,
have a
remarks?
question for
Yes,
from
Andrea.
Bulgaria. Yeah,
Yes.
I saw that you said when it comes to global riders that they don't have a correct type of contract, and I'm just wondering what type of contract do they have, because in Serbia we have wide practice of conditioning employees of registering as entrepreneurs and then having like a service agreement instead of employment agreement. So I'm wondering, is that the case for global riders as well, or is it some other type of
They have
agreement?
different kinds of contract. They're not freelancers. They're not employees.
Yeah.
Their contract is for a certain period of time and doesn't provide this medical coverage, minimum wage, etc.
So it's some type of work outside of employment.
It's not outside of employment, but these riders have to need to have a different kind of contract, not this one,
Okay.
for the work they provide.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Probably some civil law
Yeah, yeah.
contract that we
Yeah.
cannot define
Yes,
precisely
yes, yes.
here, but
Understood,
some
understood, yeah.
without
Thank you.
labor rights that are guaranteed to employees, if I'm right. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
So we do it on a different
Yeah,
way.
yes.
The outcome is the same.
Yes, the outcome is the same as
Basically,
the problems
yeah.
and challenges are. Okay.
I have-
Some
I
other
have-
questions?
Sorry
Yes,
for
Darko,
interrupting
please.
you. I have a question for Margarita. I think one thing stays in my ear, and then when you about your research, when you said that the workers who are doing delivery job through the platforms, usually it's their second job,
Yeah.
and it is also not very common thing in Serbia because workers who are doing deliveries on the platforms, it's their main and only job. So it's really came as a surprise for me. So what is their first job and how many time they spend working on the platform?
Mostly 4 hours a day.
4 hours a day.
Yeah, because their main job is 8 hours a day.
Ah,
So
okay.
this is a second job to them and 4 hours.
Ah, okay.
And I have a follow-up. And
Yeah.
in Bulgaria, the legal framework allows for that
Yeah,
many
yeah.
additional hours?
Yeah, but they have like insurance for those 8 hours, but for
Takeaway riders have
because it's
insurance,
civil.
but
Yeah.
global riders don't have. Yeah.
There can be some kind of explanation why they don't
Yes.
can't have employment contract,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they're actually employed with one employer, have one job, and that's why they're working
Yeah.
out.
But they
That's
would need
some
to
kind
be
of
insured
yes,
during those 4 hours.
it's
as well.
actually
Yeah.
some kind of abuse.
Yes,
I
yes.
understand. Okay, great. Thank you very much for the reply. Are
I'm
there some
sorry
other-
to
yes?
interrupt. It's
No.
time to wrap up, because I know the time flies.
Okay, maybe to sum up.
Please do, because
Okay,
we
okay,
really now want to
okay,
be
okay,
kind of
okay,
on time.
okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay.
Yes,
And
yes.
then you go down, see you downstairs so that you can actually
Okay.
start.
Okay,
Wake up.
okay, okay.
I have actually
Okay.
decided.
Yeah, you decided already.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank
But what
you.
happened with your Zoom
We
connection?
had some problems, technical problems that couldn't be resolved in total, but everything is okay since we can work properly. Yes, everything is okay, dear Branka, please do not worry. Yes, so, dear colleagues, well, what can be some kind of conclusion that, of course, use of artificial intelligence in itself cannot be neither positive nor negative. It depends on the way artificial intelligence systems are used, and of course the context in which they are used, which especially includes legal context. So the main issue when it comes to regulating AI, which is the title of our session, is do we need some intense legislative intervention and social dialogue, or is it possible to address some challenges and resolve some problems that are emerging because of the use of those systems on the basis of existing legal rules and general legal principles, or not? So that's the question. If you like, maybe you can briefly answer, having in mind Bulgaria, Romania, Germany, Serbia, or some other countries which you were thinking about. If you like, maybe you can just give some brief reply.
Yeah, I think we can use the legal system we have now. I mean, we can use traditional legal rules, especially traditional employment rules, to regulate this situation. I'm not a fan of, having a lot of flex specialis. Not fan.
Yes.
So I think we can use traditional labor code to regulate. And I think that a big job relies on the judges
Yes, of
and
course.
how will they anticipate it.
Yes.
And I speak on that issue with the trade unions here today. I mean, we are talking about platform economy and how to improve the working conditions for platform workers in Serbia, but still there is no single labor dispute in courts in Serbia on their employment status. So I think that is also
Yes,
a big
you're
question
right.
mark
No,
here.
yes. Not just to have a solid legal framework, which we don't have right now.
Yes.
Of course, we can use when it comes to transparency, existing rules on information and consultation or some other rules and so on. But fortunately, we don't have legal framework, which directly is of importance for this issue. And then it is also important to have, of course, jurisprudence, which will actually give some clarifications regarding definitions, regarding personal scope and so on. And then to have, of course, social dialogue, develop social dialogue on those issues, and then to have also non-governmental organizations included, to have all the stakeholders actually included, each regarding their points of interest. Okay, others, do you have some?
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, that some changes are needed, and we must unify the legislation of all member states. But it will take a lot of time, especially in Bulgaria. Not 1 year, not 2 years, maybe more than 5 years.
Okay, but we'll see if it is directive entry into force, probably that will speed up formally the improvement of legal framework or not. We'll see. But,
yes, but Bulgaria says that if something's happened, for example, in Germany, that will happen to us 10 years.
Okay, you have that reliable time frame notice. Okay. It's nice, though. In Serbia, it would be 20. I suppose, okay, now we know when we are going to, yes.
Or actually 10 years after Bulgaria.
Yes, after Bulgaria. Okay, it's good to be on safe side. Okay, Daria, maybe you have some maybe no, okay, don't want to disturb it. What about no,
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think I want to conclude a bit differently, not to contradict you in entirety, but the way I see platform work is a continuation of a process of fragmenting organization and work, and the labor law that was constructed for one type of economy, I don't think it's really serving the economy that has been changing since the late 70s, 80s, and I think this is a good opportunity to rethink what labor law can do.
I really disagree.
Okay. Maybe we can stop at this point, since there is a program waiting for us, and one of our participants is actually the speaker at next panel. So thank you very much, dear colleagues, to all of you, those that are online and those that are for those that are here with us. I think that it was interesting. Thank you very much. Interesting exchange of views with many challenges of technical nature, which is a paradox since we are talking about AI, but of course
They do everything better than us.
Yes, but everything is okay. So thank you very much and all the best, and very much looking forward to all your future research results and all other activities that we're going to do maybe together. So all the best.
Thank you.
Likewise.